Hi everyone, welcome back to Key's PWI Survival Guide. My name is Kiana and this week I am a little bit under the weather, so the video will be a tad bit shorter. Um, but I'll be sitting down and talking with Dr. Brown-Meredith about Clasp, which is a academic and social support group for students of color here on campus. So let's get into it. This week, I promised that I would talk about some resources that students would be able to utilize while on campus. And CLASP, or Collaborating with Lancers for Academic Success, is one of those resources. And I got to ask Dr. Brown-Meredith about CLASP's mission, as well as some of the events that they do. And we also talked a little bit about grit and how grit is something that students of color already have. And if we're not really familiar with the term grit, in the last 10, 15, years, grit is the perseverance or resilience in your academic, social, work environment and those things of your life. And is it something that students of color have or don't have? And I was looking through some academic journals, and a lot of the journals I've been reading have been trying to debunk the idea that students of color don't have the same kind of grit that their white counterparts do. And that was a little thing that we touched on in one of the questions. But further, maybe into next week, I'll be sitting down with Dr. Jonathan Page and talking about the scenarios that come with what Dr. Brown-Meredith calls the hidden curricular for students of color coming to a predominantly white institution. So without further ado, I will let Dr. Brown-Meredith discuss CLASP, who she is, and all of the wonderful things that CLASP brings to our campus. I will see you guys next time. Bye.
You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, so my name is Dr. Brown-Meredith, and I am an assistant professor of social work here at Longwood University. In addition to that also, I am the program coordinator for CLASP, Collaborating with Lancers for Academic Success Program. The mission essentially of CLASP is a program that looks at the holistic development of students academically. Our program specifically targets students who are minoritized. So really thinking about those students who are racial and ethnic minorities, students who are first generation, students who are transfer, and also students who have limited income. And so our program really takes into consideration what are some of those cultural aspects that impact the student academically here at the university. And we actually work from a holistic perspective. So we're thinking about the student from a social, emotional standpoint, also looking at in terms of their physical needs. I'm thinking about in terms of physiologically, but also mentally as well. And so some of our program components or thrusts really center around looking at the totality of a student. So we want to look at the student developmentally, thinking about in terms of how they enter the university and also the means in terms of their exit of the university. And so we really want them to be individuals who are student leaders, but also who are active citizens when they leave Longwood University into their prospective fields of study. CLASP is a program that specifically targets students who are minoritized. And so one of the things that we really look at in terms of student engagement. We take into consideration also in terms of academic success for our students. We look at also what does it mean for them to be at a predominantly white institution, and how do they gain the skill sets they need in order for them to facilitate progression academically. And our hopes in anticipation also in terms of the way the program is structured is that in the midst of this, that they also develop in terms of their already strengths that they have innately, but also their skill development. And so because of that, we use a really culturally relevant and competent mode of practice in terms of providing services. So that might look a little bit different than some of the other programs on campus because, for one, we're using in terms of models for student of color that might be members of this community. So really thinking specifically about first generation students. What does it look like to be a first generation student? How are some of our programs uniquely designed for that? In addition to that, also we're thinking about in terms of sense of belonging. So we're building in terms of cultural capital, but also in terms of networking through a communal spirit with a uniqueness in terms of programming that speaks specifically to students who are of color, who are limited income, who are also first generation. So our program looks a lot bit different because our model is really heavily in the practice of thinking about what are some of those theoretical approaches that we can utilize to really help students of color. The retention rate for our students looks a lot different than other programs because we're heavily immersed in their life here as a student, and we become a partner. So the model really looks at it we until it is that you can actually become an I. And so that's really looking at in terms of a cultural sensitive approach in terms of the we and of academic success. So we become a partner that's multifaceted. We work with the student. We engage them also in the community, meaning outside of the Longwood community, and also partner with their parents also. So that becomes a major component of our program. So thinking about some of those support systems and some of those allies that are here on campus that can assist us with reaching some of our objectives and also our goals. So our program is unique or different in the sense that we have a multi-tiered model. So our program provides academic tutoring, which is every Tuesday from 3:30 to 5 p.m. We meet in Hall 129A. Our dean is in full support of our program and has offered us supports so that we can ensure that there's some sustainability in our program, but also some familiarity. So students know in terms of this is the same space and place that we actually reach out to our students. On Thursdays, we have academic coaching. So we teach students skill sets like how to read a textbook, how to take notes, how to engage in conversations with your professor, what is academic advising. So we're really thinking about in terms of what the hidden curriculum might be for students of color and for students who are also first generation. Our program also has a component that we do mental health skill building. And so we have actually partnered with CAPS, and they come in once a month and they provide mental health skill building, understanding the mental health needs of students here at this campus, just overall in general. In addition to that, also we do a collaboration effort with Longwood Black Alumni Association. And so members of the Alumni Association know what it means to be a person of color at a predominantly white institution like Longwood. And so we actually match the students up with mentors who were in the same major and or like the same career field and who may be in close proximity to each other so that we can do career readiness skills once it is that a person is entered into our program and then follow that student after graduation. So our program looks at this multi-tiered approach, which I alluded to at the onset. And so the other thing that we do also is we have a women's empowerment group and a men's empowerment group. And so that group meets once a week also and really thinking about what are some of those needs that students might have as it relates to identity development, talking about things that are important to students like drugs, violence, thinking about in terms of how to gain strategies to maneuver at a university like Longwood. In addition to that, we also take into consideration aspects in terms of empowerment. What does it mean to be really empowered? And how is it that I might be able to develop some sense of self-actualization in this process? And really developing these strong relationships that lead into moving from a student into being an alumni at the university. So our hopes and anticipation is through this development of programming and these connections with other students that they'll feel a sense of community. And so that community filters over into hopefully the Alumni Association and then them coming back and volunteering, being professors, and also in terms of donating some of their funds with the understanding that they too will be contributing back to students who have needs academically also. So some of our activities that we also provide once a month for our students are game night. We have it here at the university in the whole auditorium. We also do movie night in the whole auditorium. We've done ropes courses. We meet also with Longwood Black Alumni Association, and we do events on campus also, like during spring weekend, and also for our alumni reunion as well. We do programs like Suited Up, which is a big major event that we do every March where we prepare students for the job force. So really thinking about all of those skills that you need in order to prepare for your career and the next step in your career and or your internship. And so then we take the students after we do a whole couple weeks of training and in-service, and we actually go to JCPenney's, we partner with them, and we have a whole robust program where we talk to students about proper attire, like interviewing strategies. We also look at in terms of what are some of the etiquette that you need to know in terms of eating a meal with a possible employer. So we talk about in terms of what is appropriate in terms of attire that you wear. And so we take the students to JCPenney's. They give us a major discount on that one day for a Suited Up event. It's a big event. They have blue and white balloons for Longwood University. We also have the alumni who join us. We have personal shoppers. We get a discount in advance, like a week before, and so we can actually do a preview virtually. We can pick our items up at the store on that day, and then we have this big event on that day at JCPenney's, and it's called Suited Up. And then afterwards, the Longwood Black Alumni Association meets up with the students after they've helped them shop all day and spend their money. And we have dinner, and we kind of just have a good old time and kind of, join each other and in the spirit in terms of being true Lancers. So, okay. So how has this program really affected me as a Lancer? That's a profound question. And I would say that it goes back to when I was a student at the university and it was Longwood College. And so there was never an official program for me, and I always felt like I was an outsider. And so I know what it means to be a student like many of you who may be watching this video and wondering, is Longwood the place for me? I didn't have a choice in where I went to college. My parents made me believe and think I did, but I really didn't. It was a small college and that I wouldn't just be a number. And they also knew that based on my personality that I really needed an institution that was more catered towards the development of students, right? And more student-centered. And so they felt like Longwood was that place for me. Also, at the time, there were instructors here that they knew, and so they thought, well, just like many of you, your parents are probably thinking also, is there someone there that my student can connect with? Because those connections are important in our community in terms of kinship networks, also in terms of developing a sense of community, because that produces a sense of belonging. Being able to have a space and a place that's safe, that you can kind of be yourself and talk about what's going on. Understanding there's a big learning curve going on when you enter into college, and so not really knowing in terms of how they could be a presence in my life because they were going to be absent from college. And so for parents, because I'm a parent and experiencing that with my child, now that I understand what they were thinking at the time when I thought I had a choice but I didn't, was that if I could afford my child to have as many tools and resources, because now I don't have as much control, then I can ensure their success. For many of us, college is a way out in terms of some of our financial situations, and it's also an opportunity for us to kind of charter our next steps in our path. And so I would say to you that being a person of color at Longwood College was hard. It was hard for me in the sense that I didn't have a group. I had friends who decided to come here that we were friends with all through elementary school, middle school, high school. And then when they came to Longwood, it was like those ties were severed. And so you may experience the same thing, where you had this pact with your buddy, and y'all were coming to school together, and you thought it was all going to work out. And, and you thought we're going to be roomies, and this is going to be great. We're going to get some freedom from our parents. And at the same time, too, we're going to still maintain these relationships. Well, that didn't happen. And that didn't happen for me as being a student of color that had predominantly white friends, but it doesn't happen for a lot of students even when they go to HBCUs. It's just because people change, right? And the fact of the matter is that you'll experience a lot of growth between high school, graduation, and coming to college the first day that you enter the university. And you think, oh, no, it's not going to change. It's a lot of growth in those like 30, 45 days. And so what I suggest and say to you is that for me, my mother and father were astute enough to know that there was somebody here that I could connect with. And so I went to Dr. Clark, who used to be a professor here. And I also went to Dr. Bledsoe, who was also a professor of color here as well. And so they were kind of those persons in my life that geared me to what directions I needed to go, that held me accountable, that maintained in terms of expectations for me, that demanded Black excellence, and which I still try to personify today, thinking about in terms of who they are and what they wanted from me and how they may have articulated that to me in a variety of different ways. There was also at that time Dr. Cross, who was my advisor for a sorority that I'm in, Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and so she too was very instrumental in my life here at the university, and if I didn't have those connections, I wouldn't have made it. And so this program means a lot to me because I'm able to give back to my community. If I can assist a student, then I can assist a family, because I know in terms of a lot of families make sacrifices, big sacrifices, to send their kids to school. I have had students who've come to me who may not be in the education whole building. I'm in the whole building, which is the education building. And so we house all of, except for one at this time, except for one professor, we house all of the instructors of color. And so other students may not have the same level of access or be able to see people that look like them that are in instructor positions or in positions of power and authority here at the university. So for them, it looks a lot different. And students sometimes don't know in terms of where to go or how to ask questions, or if I'm feeling this way, what does that account to? Is it real for me? Or am I experiencing something that's out of ordinary? Or am I just making all this up in my mind, right? And so a lot of these things go on and you internalize them and you don't have anyone to process. And so this program is important to me because it affords students that opportunity. It affords students to have a space and a place that that people are just like them, have gone through the similar experiences. So you don't have to do a lot of explanation. You don't have to put on a lot of airs. You don't have to make excuses. You don't have to pretend that you know something that you really don't know, because no one knows. And so what happens is a lot of times is that the volunteers in our program, they assist students with helping them to navigate some of these places and spaces in the hidden curriculum of being in college. Meaningful connections to ensure your success. Clasp is one of those programs that we offer to provide that. I thought about the things that I needed. Dr. Alexander, who was the one who was instrumental, and he actually came up with this ideal of this program, Dr. Quentin Alexander, he too knew what it meant to be a person of color who was first gen at a predominantly white institution. And so we thought about intentionality of programming. Think about what is it that we really need. So a lot that we give to students in terms of our time. We also provide supplemental advising, which I didn't allude to, but we provide supplemental advising to our students as well. We coach them. We provide them with case management. And when I say coach, I'm talking about if there's a problem that occurs, we talk about it, we problem solve, I offer strategies for them, and then we role play it out in terms of how they may implement that. I check in back with them to say, okay, how did it go? What went well, what didn't, how can we make modifications and or changes? And how is it that I'm able to kind of perceive that and internalize what my experiences might be? And so students in our program have been relatively successful. We help students who are on probation and or suspension. That's how our program initially started. It was a program that initially started with 5 students, right? And so it has multiplied times that now. One of the things we also do in terms of program that really supports our students is that we offer them, we like nudges. So we remind them of information. We send them in terms of words of encouragement. You know, that's relatively important. We operate from a realm of also of spirituality. Spirituality is important in our community. And so this program means all of that to me. It means liberation. It means excellence. It means that you would have the fortitude to persevere. And it also means that you have the ability to do the work just like anybody else in terms of the cognition and also the ability to matriculate at a university like Longwood as well. But sometimes we may need specific skills to help us because we not have the opportunity to execute. And so what this program does is it tries to help give students the skills they need to get them out there in their natural environments, working on their own behalf, being successful academically, and then taking that and being leaders in their communities. I'm talking about their communities when you leave Longwood, because Longwood's just 4 years, okay? And so we need members of our program to personify excellence. And I'm talking about excellence in all aspects when you leave the university and out into your community, meaning the community in which you live, meaning in terms of your church community, and also your professional work community as well. Think about this term in terms of grit. When our children are born, we innately have to teach them how to maneuver society as a person of color, which means that some of these basic strategies that other students might be learning because of national pandemics, for example, or being away from home, right? Or taking care of yourself independently. These are some of the basic skills that our children have been taught early on in life. And so when you talk about in terms of this term of grit, you know, there's a lot of debate about it in academia now in terms of, is it really that students of color need to gain grit, or is it that they already have grit and that the definition of grit looks a little bit different for students of color than for students of the majority race? And so I would say this to you about this thing about grit. When we went through the pandemic and all students were facing adversity because of this COVID-19, this horrible disease. Our students that were in our program in Clasp, only one student took the alternative grading system. And the reason why that was is because they already knew what was required of them, what was expected, and they already know how to maneuver with having meager items, assets, resources, etc., right? And so it really, it looked different for them, but not to the magnitude of students of majority, right? And so what we're really talking about is really talking about resources, right? And we're talking about access to resources. And we're talking about the skills that one has already acquired because they have limited resources. And so not to say that students did not have adverse experiences, but a lot of the experiences that students of color had was because other faculty members didn't understand that they were using their grit in the sense that they had to modify their living expectations in order for them to meet the needs of the family so they could also get their academic needs met as well. So what do I mean by that? I mean a variety of things. So our students of color, when they go home during the pandemic, they fall right back into the role of a family. So they're no longer just a student, they're a sibling, they're a member of a nuclear family, and they have also responsibilities in terms of the home itself and the extended family. They go right back into those roles. My family, the same thing as well. My kids, I'm like, okay, we went back into it. It's culture. Our students also during the pandemic, not only did they take classes online, they were the ones who were the breadwinners from the time that their families were experiencing the pandemic. Because why? Their parents, a lot of them were service providers, were out because they were ill or they didn't have in terms of, they didn't have jobs anymore because they didn't working from home like most folks were. So they had to go out and get jobs like at Amazon, at Walmart, driving for in terms of like food delivery services or grocery store services, etc. And so our kids were doing a multitude of things. They became the caregivers of siblings because parents were working. They weren't working from home. They were working outside of the home. The children didn't have any daycare and they weren't in school. So who became the daycare provider? It was the college students. They also became the educator. So you know what? You're in college. It's your responsibility now to kind of help your sibling out in terms of their academics. And so when we go in terms of this grit, and we talk about this grit and developing grit, our students already have grit, but the breakdown in terms of where there might be some differentiation is access. So if they had access to some of the basic resources that the majority of students had, then what you would see is that they would excel beyond measures because what they're doing is is that they're doing what's already expected of them, plus several other additional things as it relates to in terms of helping out their family, in terms of the economics of the household, in terms of helping maintain the household, helping in terms of extended family members, grandparents, aunties, uncles. And so this was a lot different for our students. And so coming to college, the black tax for our students is high. And I don't know if a lot of our instructors understand that, because they have sometimes these unrealistic expectations and or thoughts about students coming to school. Like, you're independent now and you're a college student, and so you make decisions on your own. No, that don't happen in the black family. You think you're grown, but you're really not, right? Your parents are still holding you accountable, that you're making decisions, but they're really the ones that were making the deciding, had a deciding factor in the outcome, right? In addition to that, also, when families send kids to school, it's not just like the nuclear family, it's the whole family, okay? So aunties are helping you buy some of the items you need for your room. They're helping you buy clothes. They're making sure you have your books. Okay, they may not understand some of the material or what you're going through. However, they're there for you for emotional support. They're on there on the prayer lines. They're on their knees, saying whatever that child may need in order to get through that semester. They're praying about it. And so they're also providing them with this sense of encouragement. And it's almost as if you have this burden of obligation to make certain that you matriculate, and not only that you graduate in a high enough standard in order for you to carry on the expectations of the family, and you keep the honor of the family intact. And so, in addition just to coming to school, to figuring out, how to go about it in terms of using simple things like Canvas, or, right, how do I use my card in order to get my meals, right? Or who's gonna do my laundry, right? So those type of things, or how do I go grocery shopping, or how do I get around town? Our students are thinking about things of like, well, if I don't do well, how am I gonna tarnish my family's name? My family values education because they know that education is the only liberator in our society, right? They're thinking about also in terms of, if I don't do well, what's it gonna look like? Now I have this expense of college, and if I am not successful, now my parents have an additional bill, which they couldn't afford from the get-go when they sent me here to school anyways, but they were gonna make sacrifices. And some of them said, well, I don't know how it's gonna work out, but we're just gonna be prayerful about it. It's gonna work itself out, right? And so these issues that students face of color becomes compounded and build, and then when they encounter microaggressions at school, or micro insults, or invalidated, or feel like they're not a sense of belonging, or don't have a community, it just tells them in their mind when they go through this negative self-talk that you weren't deserving in the first place, or you shouldn't have been here anyway, or you know what, you're just like what they say about you, because the perception is, it may not be spoken, but this is how we perceive you to be. And so what that does is it perpetuates this internal sense of slavery, in a sense, in terms of slaving one's mind in their sense of ability to be able to excel. And it just strips them of hope. And so, again, I go back to this program that, we run here at the university, is that, we don't leave any fallen soldiers, right? So everyone has some sense of obligation to excel, because we ourselves become a family, right? And we hold each other accountable. So just like the family systems that we leave our homes to come here to school, we make that pseudo-family for the students here at the university. And so the goal is that when they achieve, we all achieve. So it goes back to what I started at the onset of our conversation. It's about a we. It's not about an I.